My name is Qureshi, and today I will be discussing with you Oracle Integration Cloud feature projects. I will be showing a lot of live demos today, but before we go ahead, let's understand what project feature is. Within Oracle Integration Cloud, projects consist of self-contained assets. It is a workspace for your developer or project teams to have integrations, connections, lookups, and JavaScript libraries all bundled together in one place. The key capabilities: it is a unified workspace, as we discussed, for integrations, connections, lookups, and JavaScript libraries. It results in a simplified delivery management for promoting selected versions of integrations. And in today's demo, we will see how we can create deployments and move it from one environment to another. It offers role-based access control, so you can set up groups or specific users and give them access who can edit the projects, who can view the projects, or who can just monitor the projects. You get a focused observability, so all the integrations, its observability monitoring would be specified within that project. Easy upgrades for integrations and accelerators. As you can know, Oracle team is providing a lot of recipes and accelerators, so you can use projects to easily upgrade those. And you can create deployments. And the way you can use these deployments is to have a number of integrations part of one deployment, activate them all together, deactivate them all together, as well as you can use these deployments to move from one project, from one integration instance to another. From the restrictions perspective, as always, I always mention that please look at the documentation for the latest and greatest. There might be some other restrictions, but one of the key ones currently is that in one project, you can create 70 integrations, 10 connections, 10 lookups, and 10 JavaScript libraries. But these things keep changing, so please refer to the documentation for the latest capabilities and restrictions. In today's demo, I will be taking you through a life cycle of integration. So we will create a project, we'll create deployments, we'll create some versions of the integrations and migrate these integrations from one instance to another using the project deployments. From the integration perspective, I will be creating an integration to bulk load data into an ATP database. So in this bulk load data, we will get a file from an FTP location and load it into an ATP database. You will see me create some connections, connection for an ATP database, for an FTP. You will see me schedule an integration, and we will see features like how we can check the future schedule integration running instances. So schedule. Let's start. This is Oracle Integration Cloud homepage. For projects, on the left-hand menu, we click on projects. You can see I have a few projects here, but I will create a new project. For that, we need to click on add. There are two options. I can import a project, and this option we will use when we will move the project from one environment to the other. But now let's create a brand new project. Click create. Let's give it a name, project sales order. Here you can see I have an option of whether I want to keep this project for just myself because I'm the owner, or I want to allow anyone to edit, view, and monitor. At this time, I just want to keep it for me, so I will not select this option. Now, to create the project, click create. In the projects, here you can see we have areas for creating integrations, connections, lookups, libraries. Later on, we will create some deployments. There's an area for deployment. And observe, that is the monitoring and observability area specific to the integrations which will be running inside this project. On the left-hand side, we see some information like details. And if I want to share this project with others, so let's start with that. This is our role-based access capability within projects. So if I want to share it, I will click on share. And here, there are three options. I can allow people to edit. So I want my team member, for example, to edit, another team member to just view, and I am selecting a group who I want to allow to monitor. So we can select specific users or groups to edit, view, or monitor. Let's add another user to allow them to edit. So by clicking share, now they have specific access, and I can look at that access anytime, and I can revoke that access as I'm the owner. Now, I want to create a few integrations. So first up, I need to create a connection. My first connection is an ATP database. So I will look for the ATP adapter. Let's give it a name. 001. Create. In the ATP connection, from a security perspective, there are three ways we can connect. We can connect over SSL, basic authentication, or OCI signature. The integration that I'm creating is about bulk load data into the ATP database, which takes in a CSV file. That option is only available as part of JDBC with OCI signature, so I will select that. This requires me to upload the wallet information, the database username, password, and there are certain specific requirements around the object storage, region, tenancy OCID, compartment OCID, the user which has access to this object storage, and their private key and fingerprint. You will find this information in the documentation, as well as there are blogs available where you can see how to get this information. So I will enter all this information. For that, I will just pause the recording for a few minutes. So I have entered all the information, and I have also tested the connection. So this has been connected successfully. One of the things that I notice that people make a mistake when they are creating the ATP connection at the start is they often forget about providing the service name. This is required when you are connecting via OCI signature or SSL, since it's hidden in the optional properties. So please make sure you provide the correct service name. Okay, we go back. The second connection I need is a REST connection. So I will look for the REST adapter. I will provide name. And this will be only used as a trigger. So I'll just select the role as trigger. Click create. And for the trigger connection, the only thing I need to select is the security policy. It can be triggered by providing the basic authentication, OAuth, or both, OAuth or basic authentication. So I will choose that. Click save, test, make sure it's tested successfully, and that's done. The final connection that I am going to create is the FTP connection, because I will have a file in an FTP location that loads into the ATP database. And for this FTP, before I create the connection, I am using the file server which comes with Oracle integration. So if you have access, if you are one of the service administrators of your Oracle integration environment, you can click on the program menu at the top left, settings, and file server. This is the file server that comes with OIC, and within the settings, we can get the information of the host IP, the port number, and inside users, like if I show you my user, we can set up authentication via key, and what is the default folder name, and few other details. So you need to configure that, and you need to have that information. So let's go back to our projects, project sales order, and create this FTP connection. So in connections, I will look for FTP, provide a name, FTP connection, user 1, create. And here I need to provide the host name, server port as I get in from those settings. Optional properties, since it's an SFTP, so I need to provide that as yes. And there are a few other settings over there, which I can use. In security policy, there is an FTP server access, key authentication, and multi-level authentication. I will be connecting via the public key authentication. Okay. So again, I will pause the recording for a few seconds while I enter these details. So I have provided all the details and tested the connection, diagnose and test. It connects successfully. So my FTP connection has been set up. Let's go back. I need to create a lookup. So I will go into lookups, click on add, click create. This lookup I will use as part of the notification. So I will call this as notification lookup. Here I can add multiple domain names, so it doesn't have to be 2. So I can create, for example, more. And let's edit the domain name. So one is notify, and the other domain name is email address. So 2. Let's just provide my email address, and from is this email address. This email address you can find in the settings, or you can create your own email address that you want to send. So that's it. Save. Now my connections and lookup has been set up. Now let's create our first integration. So in integrations, click on add. I will create a new integration. It is an application pattern, and this is the sales orders ATP. What I want to do is I want to create a REST-based integration, which will take the file name and it will load it into an ATP database. So here I have the connections available that can be started as a trigger. So I will use the HQ REST connection that we created. Let's call it trigger sales order. Next, I'll just give a URI. Since it's sending data, so I'll just make it post. I'll configure it as a request payload. I do not want to provide a response, so this is asynchronous. Next, here I need to provide the request payload. So I select JSON sample, inline, and I'm just passing the instance ID and file name. Okay. Next, that's it. Happy with the endpoint summary. Done. So my REST trigger has been set up. Next, I want to read the data from the FTP. So if I show you my FTP, this is my FTP server, this is the location, and this is the file. So let's go into invoke connections, find our FTP connection. We can drag and drop it after a trigger. Let's call it read sales order file. Next, operation, I want to read a file and I just want to read it as binary. What is the input directory? So input directory would be the full directory. So I will select that. And the file name is, this doesn't have to be the exact file name because we can pass this as part of the mappers, but I will provide the file name. I have saved it here. So that's my sales orders.csv. Next, I don't want to pass the schema. So because I'm just going to pass the reference, so I'll select no. And that's it, right? Summary, I see, okay, it's a binary file coming in. Done. In the mapper, as remember from my trigger, I was passing one of the values or the file name. So if I want to change that on the go, I can actually do that. So in edit the mapper, I have the two options, file name and directory. And let's map the file name here. Validate. And that's good. Okay. Once we have read the file, we want to push it to the ATP. So again, go into connections, bring in the ATP connection and put it after the invoke that we created in there. And here I will say add sales order. And at the bottom, when you see the operations, there are 4 operations. Invoke stored procedure, we can invoke a stored procedure in an ATP database, run a SQL statement, perform an operation on a table. And the final option, which is perform bulk data import operation, this is the option which is only available when you set up the ATP connection as JDBC SSL via signature. And this is why I chose that security option. So this is what we want to do. Next. Now it asks me where it wants to save the file that we read from in the last step in our bucket. So I select and I'm choosing the HQ bucket. And there are certain requirements of what policy needs to be created. And you will find that in the documentation. So remember, when I was creating the connection, I was providing a very specific username. That username needs to have access to this bucket. So in the review and specify, there are certain options we can select. Rather, there are a lot of options. So my file, if I open that file, let's open this file. This is a comma separated file, and you can see there are, quite a few records over here. So the delimiter is comma. The record delimiter, it's created on Windows, so r/r/n. You can see in the file that I have, the first line is a header. So I want to skip headers, so I want to select it as 1. Okay. There are other advanced options which are around, what is the parameter for null, ignore, how many records you want to ignore from a perspective of errors, and there are quite a few other details. So in my case, at this stage, I'll just go with these settings. I'm happy, so click OK. Now, the next is select the schema. This is the schema within the ATP database, and my schema name is HQ user. So I'll just go find it. And next up, it's showing all the tables which exist. So I want to move the data into the V sales orders table. Okay. Now, one requirement is when you look at your file, because the mapping, you see I have order ID, region, country, item type, and so on. These column names needs to be in the same order as the column name that I specify over here, right? I do have an option of changing the order, right? I can if I want, but the mapping would be the 1-to-1. So make sure the file that you have created and the data that you are moving to this table, this is a staging table, these records are in the same, these columns over here are in the same order. Once I'm happy with that, click next. Here, look at the summary. I'm all good and done. it's a good practice to save regularly. So now I have a mapper just before this invoke add sales order. So let's edit that mapper. And in this, what I need to pass the file reference. So if you remember in the last step, we create this read sales order file and its response. It provides the file reference that is going to read at that stage. So I just need to map file reference to file reference. Validate. Okay. So my integration is almost complete. Now, the last thing is I need to add the business identifier. And here, I just want to pass the instance ID that's going to come in and the file name that's coming in this as a request parameter. So click save. Okay. Now, one thing that is important in creating this integration, because in the next integration, I want to call it from a schedule-based integration because I want to schedule this on a regular basis, is when you create an integration, there are these settings. There is an option below which says available to other projects. So if I want to make this integration to be called from other projects, I need to select this option as yes. Otherwise, this integration will not be available from other projects, only be available from within this project, right? So just be mindful of this setting if you want to allow your integration to be executed from other projects, because this can be a scenario. You might create a project where you are keeping all the common integrations which other projects can call, and so this setting is important. So okay, let's click save. Go back. Let's activate this integration. I'll choose tracing as debug and activate. Okay, now this is a REST integration, but I also want to create a schedule-based integration which will call this integration regularly. So let's click on add, create. The last integration was an application-driven integration, and now I want to create a schedule-based integration. So let's call it schedule or HQ sales orders ATB. Again, I have this option available to other projects, but I don't need it at this moment. Now, when we create this integration, I am scheduling it so that I can just invoke this child integration. And this is one of the best practices. What we recommend that when you create a schedule-based integration, all the business logic that you are performing, you should be performing in a child integration, like just I created one, which is an asynchronous integration, so that your schedule, the whole purpose of the schedule is to trigger that integration, and that's it, right? This way, it is not going to queue up if you have a lot of schedules running at the same time. So I go to actions. Inside actions, I have call integrations. I want to call this. I'll bring this after schedule. Call HQ sales orders ATP. Let's give that the name. And here it is asking whether this integration exists in a project or it's not in a project, because on Oracle integration, there is a workspace which is generic, and then there are workspaces based on project. So my integration is inside project sales orders, and the integration that I'm looking for is HQ sales orders. For integrations to appear here, they need to be in activated stage, and this is why I had activated it in the last step. Okay. My integration, I only have one operation, which is post, so I select that. Summary, I'm happy with that. Done. And now I need to pass the values. So there's a mapper. So let's edit it. So in this, I have component, there are two values mainly, the instance ID and file name. So for instance ID, what I want to do is just to have a link between from which scheduler this integration is running, I want to pass the instance ID of this running schedule. So on the left-hand side, you look, we have integration metadata. In metadata details, there is quite a lot of details which are available as part of, for example, the integration name, identifier version, and runtime details, where we have the instance ID as well as who invoked this integration. So I'll pass this instance ID to this. And the file name, for me, I'm just going to, at this stage, hardcode. I can actually use a lookup to make those changes. So my file name is salesorders.csv. So that's good. Validate. It's done. Lastly, I need to create a business identifier. So I'll pass the business identifier field. I'll just pass the sales start time. Save. This integration is complete. Let's go back and let's activate it. Debug. Okay. Now, okay. So I created two integrations. This is a schedule integration, which is calling this, and I have activated it. Let's run this integration. For now, I'm just running it as ad hoc. So let's click on that, run. Okay. Now this has started. Now let's go into observe and see how our integrations are running. So the schedule started. Okay, I can see the schedule integration started and completed, and it called the child integration that also started and completed. So if I click on the start time, I can see the integration started. I can see from the activity stream what kind of a data was mapped. So you can see, for example, this is the instance ID, this is the file name that I mapped. Similarly, if I go and I look at the other integration, I can see that has started and completed successfully. And again, I can see at every level what is the data that is passing through. So if you look at this, okay, now let's go into the database. This is my table. And let's see. You can see that all 60 records have been inserted successfully. So in this integration, we can see, it took like 9.4 seconds for this to, load that many records. And this pattern can be applied for multiple, like thousands of records as well. Okay. Now, next up, let's create a deployment. So we saw design, we saw observe. Let's go into deployment. Let's create a deployment. Click on create. Let me call it project sales orders 00. Okay. (001). Okay, so that's my name. Here I have two integrations. So in this case, I am selecting both of them. And you can see I have the choice. I can, I might not include one of the integrations, but in this case, I'm selecting both of them and I click on save. Now, okay. Now, one of the things that you would notice that I can, at the deployment level, this has got both integrations. I can activate and deactivate. So if I click on this and I click deactivate, this will go ahead and deactivate all the integrations in that deployment in one go. So sometimes we are asked, how can I easily activate and deactivate multiple integrations? Because in production, I was talking to a customer, they had around 120 integrations or 50 integrations. So one way now, you can just put them in a project, add them in a deployment, and use the deployment feature to activate or deactivate. So if I go ahead and activate the integrations, I can provide what is the tracing level, click on activate, and you would see that coming into design, both the integrations have been activated. Okay. The other thing, the benefit we can get from deployments is to move it from one environment to the other. So I select, I click on export. This has been exported, and I have a different Oracle integration environment where if I go to projects, currently I have no projects available. So I can click on add. This time I will import the CAR file, drag and drop. And this is what I had just exported. Open. Again, I have the option whether I want anyone to edit, view, or monitor. I click on import. And this project has been imported, right? So the two integrations, and I have got all the three connections. One of the things that we need to do first time is make sure, because we do not bring the credentials. So you see the ATP and FTP connections, they are in the config draft stage. So I need to go there and provide the connection details again, right? But that's the first time activity. They won't be overwritten next time. Okay, let's go back to our environment. Coming to design, and let's say I have a change request. The integration is working fine, but I have been asked to add a notification once the integration is done successfully, to add that. So the way we would recommend is I need to add the notification to the HQ sales orders ATP. So I select, I create a new version. Now there are options. So the version, the major version is the same. The minor version is different. The difference about major and minor versions is that two integrations of the same major version cannot be run in parallel. So if your scenario is in the blue-green deployment that you want the next version, two of the integrations to be running in the same time, so provide the major version different. But if your scenario is you just want one of them to run at a time, okay, you want to enforce this, then the minor version needs to be different, right? You don't need to change the major version. So this is a minor change. So I'll just add the minor version, create version. So I have this new version has been created, 1.01. And in this integration, I need to add notification at the end. So I come over here, actions, and bring this notification after invoke ATP sales order, because I want to send an email. So let's go to 2. And remember, we created a lookup. So I will come over here. I have integration cloud lookup value. So I use this function. Okay. I have only one lookup, so I select that. The source is notify, and the target is email. So default value I am selecting is for this is 2, or I don't need a default value, and done. And the service value placeholder is what value I want to pass. So this is for 2, so I'm just adding that. Similarly, from I will get it from the lookup as well. Lookup value. select the lookup. Source is notified. Target is the email. Again, I don't need the default value. Here, it provides, okay, what is the value that we are passing? So this is for me is the from. So because I'm passing from, I want to get the from email address. And in future, if something changes, if my from email changes or my to email changes, I can just make the changes in the lookup. Subject, let's do a concatenation here. So I have a string function, concat, and I'm going to say integration. The name of the integration, I can get it from the self metadata integration name. So integration name, and the last is I'm just providing the status. So that's going to be the subject. And in the body, here you can see that it tells me if I add any parameters, I can add those parameters over here. So let's add a parameter. Let's call it instance ID. And the value, again, this is the current running instance ID. So I go to metadata, runtime, and I'm passing this value. Okay. And in the body, I want to keep it very simple. I just want to pass, say, this is the instance ID. And I just want to say integration has been completed successfully for instance ID. Let's provide this instance ID. Okay. Click save. So notification has been set up. So this is the change that I wanted. Looks good. Let's go back. And now I will create a new deployment where I will just include this HQ sales order. One of the things you would notice, if I try to go and activate this integration, it's going to give me some messages. Activating integration 1.01 requires deactivating 1.0. Are you sure you want to deactivate integration? So if I click on activate, it will deactivate 1.0. So you can see, and activates this. So as I mentioned, when you have a minor version, only one integration can execute. Now let's create a deployment. I want to pass this integration to the other environment. So deploy, create, project, sales order, dev002. And in this, I didn't make any changes to ATP. So I will, in this one, I'm just got 1.01, right? And in the schedule integration, I've not made any changes. So I'll just select none because I don't want this to be moved, right? So I'm just having a 1.01. So let's click on save. And you can see this one has got only one integration. Let's check one thing in our other environment when we moved dev001. Here, if you noticed, when I moved the old project in here, I had two integration. And at this time, I was not using notifications. That means I was not using lookups. So it did not bring the lookup in, right? Because there was no dependency on the lookup. Now, this time, if I go to this environment and let's export to, so let's export. This has been exported. Going to my other environment and let's click at the projects, click add, import, drag and drop, and the 002. Import. This has been imported successfully. Going into project sales order, I can see that 1.01 has come in here, as well as the lookup, right? So when we are creating deployments and we are creating integration, it brings all the dependencies. So in my first project, the dependency was only the connection. In the second time, it is the notification lookup as well. Another thing that I would like to show you today is how we can set up a schedule for an integration. For the demo purposes, I just ran the schedule as ad hoc. That's an option. But if I want to set up a schedule, next to a schedule integration, I can click on these three dots, add schedule. We have two options. We can provide an ICAL expression or use the simple option. I want this frequency to be days. I can set every 2 days, every 3 days. So I'm selecting every 1 day. When the schedule starts, you can modify the start date and time. So I say it starts from tomorrow. I can select what time. So maybe I want this to run at 10 p.m. Okay, I can select until when. It can be indefinite, or I might want to run it just for a week. So I just select, okay, the expiry date, time zone, that is my current time zone, and click save. Once the schedule has been saved successfully, go back. We need to start the schedule. So you can see it runs from 24th of July this time. So I select play. And the schedule has been started. So this is starting right now. Let's wait for this to start. This has been started, right? And now you can see the future instances of this schedule, right? If I go back, in the observe, you would find I have one integration which is running on the future runs, right? And you can see, so if I look at the month, for example, you can see which days it is running. So 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th onwards. If I select, I can see what time this integration is running. So I set it up at 10 p.m. if you remember, so 24th July. And the integration that is scheduled is the schedule HQ sales order ATP. So this way we can see the future runs of our scheduled integrations. If I go back again in the project sales orders, observe future runs, and this is where we can see this information. And last thing in the project, it's very easy to see the audits. So again, within observe, the instances is where we see the integration instances, future runs, the future run of our schedule integrations, and audit is it tells you what tasks were performed by whom. So you can see in this case, I've been working on all day. So what time I did, for example, I locked the integration, I start schedule action, I have stopped the schedule, I have created some integration. So this is all the audit information. This can be downloaded as well. So in today's session, we discussed Oracle Integration Cloud featured projects. You saw me create multiple integrations. One integration was to bulk load data into an ATP database, a schedule integration to call this asynchronous integrations. We created some versions as well, and how those versions can be managed within Oracle Integration Cloud. We created a project, deployments, how we can use deployments to activate multiple integrations, deactivate multiple integrations, or migrate environments from one instance to another. We also saw creating lookups, the dependencies when a deployment is moved, and we have some integration in it. So what dependencies are moved across with it. And finally, we saw how to set up schedules of an integration and see future instances. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thanks a lot.